It's funny, but having a firm date in the diary for retiring does change your relationship with work. It does make you feel different. And colleagues of mine that have retired previously to me, they've said the same, and I didn't honestly believe them, to be honest. But now I have a firm date in the diary. I'm retiring in June 26, and they're right. And in this video, I want to explore exactly that. Why is it that having a firm date in a diary does change your relationship with work? Why do people treat you differently? And how have they treated me differently since I've got that date firmly in my mind? And how am I treating them differently? And what has it meant for my health and well-being? Well, if you want to find out about my experiences, stick with us and watch this video. So it is weird that once you've made that decision, yes, I am going to retire on such and such a date, then time starts to behave differently. You kind of started the countdown clock. And it definitely does feel like that. You're counting down to this big event in your life. And you know what? Time seems to go in reverse, because instead of the clock moving forwards, it feels like the clock is counting down. It's going backwards. Actually, this is how long I've got left. My gosh, what have I got to do before I finish? That is really marked. And I didn't appreciate what effect that would have on me in my everyday approach to work. And it has. And one of the weirdest things is that even ordinary work days don't feel ordinary anymore, because actually the days you've got left before you finish work, well, the stuff you want to get done before you finish. It's weird how important some of these minutiae, some of these weirdly dull everyday things actually start to take priority. We think, well, I've got to get that done, or I haven't got enough time to get that. These things rise in importance. They certainly have for me. I thought I would give less F's, if you like, about all of these things. I really did. I thought, oh no, well, it doesn't matter, I'm retiring soon. It's been the exact opposite. And one of the other weird things is that I think people started to notice this. And I had this big decision to make. Do I announce my plans? Do I tell my boss? Do I tell my colleagues? Do I tell my friends at work that actually I've got a date, I've made my plans, and I'm going through with it? And for me, I did decide to do that. In fact, I made that decision quite easily and quite early in this journey, to be honest. And for the reason why I found it quite easy to make that decision, one, I had a good relationship with my boss. Two, if it did go pear-shaped and everything said, well, you can go now then, well, that was one of the what-if scenarios. I had stress tests when I was making my retirement plan. If you haven't watched my video about making the retirement plan and the financial aspects of this, please go and watch that. And that was one of the things I had considered is, well, what happens if I then announce, I'm going to retire? What happens if people then say, well, you can go early then, we don't want you here anymore? And I could financially afford it if that did come to, into fruition. But I did decide to tell my boss, because I got on with them at the end of the day. But I think psychologically, one of the other really important reasons for me sort of announcing that actually that's my date, I'm going, is that I wanted to hold myself to account. I've made my plan. I pulled the trigger on the plan. I'm going to go on that day. And it was a way of making sure that I honoured my commitment to myself. And I can't stress how important that's been as we get closer, because, any nagging doubts that I've had at all, well, I'm thinking, well, you've put the trigger now, you're going to take it. And it's really helping me prepare for what's coming down the line. So how has my approach to my work changed now I've made the big reveal? Well, I'm still doing my job, and I'm still doing it properly and to the best of my ability. And that really hasn't changed. But there has been a couple of sort of more subtle changes on how I approach my daily work. And when I first announced that I was going to retire, my immediate focus was that I had a finite amount of time to get everything I wanted to do done in the world of work. And I started to give a lot of energy into getting things done that needed doing. And I would find myself working long hours again, working weekends again. And it took a while for me to realise this was absolute folly, and that actually work would go on after I've left, and these projects would be continued after I've left. And, nobody's irreplaceable. People have said that to me many times in the past. But at the time, I wasn't quite ready to accept that. I needed to slowly adjust how I was thinking about work and make a transition ready to retire in a sensible, healthy mindset. So I'm 6 months into this journey now, and it is strange that as I'm getting closer and closer to retirement days, then I slowly, and it is slow, but I am becoming less and less attached to all of these issues. This bit about me starting to not care less, but worry less. I'm sleeping better at night because I am not worrying about getting the stuff done because I'm getting closer and closer. And there are some things that I physically am not going to be able to get done in the remaining time I have left. And the realization of that is a bit of an epiphany. It's a eureka moment. I think, well, why am I worrying about it? I'm not going to be able to get it done. They're going to have to come up with another way of getting it done and getting delivered what they need to be delivered. I've stopped volunteering for stuff too. That's a relief, I can tell you. And I feel good about saying no to things now. There's no guilt anymore. I can say no on the basis that there just isn't the time to get stuff done. I can't tell you how refreshing that is. One of the concepts I tried to get my head around early on after I announced I was going to retire was this issue of legacy. Everybody, I think, wants to be remembered after they're no longer there. We all want a bit of that. We want to be remembered in a positive way as well. And I started to think, well, what could I do in the workplace that would help me build that, knowing that I had a finite time left to get any sort of positive actions and developments across the line. And what I found myself doing was I started to change how I was prioritizing what I was doing. I wasn't necessarily doing everything the boss wanted me to do. I was beginning to prioritize the things that I felt would have the most positive impact on others. And that's quite subtle change in terms of, because traditionally, you're doing what you set, but you're prioritizing the task that you're told that you need to deliver. Well, now, since I knew I was going, that prioritization changed. And hopefully people have noticed that and benefited from that as well. And I'm 6 months into that transition now, and it has taken me that long to get into a place where in my head, I know that there are some things that are just not going to get done. And that's cool. So what I realised is that I'd actually given myself quite a long running period to make this adjustment, to go from that, oh my God, I've only got so many sort of days left to get all of this done, to actually I can't get it all done. Other people are going to have to step up. And it has been a gradual change, a gradual transition, a gradual pulling away from my responsibilities, and a bit of a sort of a sobering realization about your place in your world of work and what you actually mean to your employer. And that's been really important. And I am actually glad I've given myself a long transition period to make that adjustment rather than to simply just stop and then have to make this adjustment in a very short space of time, like my 3 month notice period. Now, one of the impacts of not being able to plan work that far ahead is that you get a gap mentally in your diary, in your forward planning diary. And that's been really helpful because what it has allowed me to do is to start mentally preparing for what I'm going to do after I finish work. The diaries, like many people, my work life is run by a diary, appointments to make, meetings to attend to, customers to visit, all of those things. Well, those appointments are all in my diary for many months in advance, and they suddenly stop. And then there's an emptiness in my diary. But what I am starting to be able to think about now is what goes into those days. And again, this slow, gentle transition away from running at full tilt, planning my work life, to actually, I'm going to be retiring. What do my days actually look like? That's been really positive. So how are other people treating me now I have announced my retirement? Well, they're treating me in different ways and generally really positively. There are those, of course, that do appear to be in denial. No, he won't go through with it. He's just joshing. He's always talking about retirement for as long as I've known him. There are people that genuinely think that and don't think that actually now is when I'm actually going to pull the trigger on my retirement plan. There are some that I think are a little bit more sensitive to how I'm feeling and are starting to treat me differently in that, they are starting to have more nostalgic conversations and starting to try and get time with me to chat, but also to pick my brains and realise actually that, as daft as he looks, there's some knowledge in that head of his, and maybe I ought to try and find out what's in there, and maybe that, that could be helpful to them. And I'm really, really grateful for those people that have done exactly that. There's nothing I enjoy more than passing on knowledge to others. There are others in the business that are seeking to use my remaining time to get me to do as much for them as possible. There are quite a few of those, actually. That's nice in a way. It's a backhanded compliment, isn't it? But, time is running out and there's only one pair of hands, and there's going to be a few that are probably going to be disappointed there. But, people are generally being really, really constructive, very positive, and most people are wishing me well. One of the things that does take a bit of getting used to is the realization that decisions that you would normally be involved in are being taken without your involvement, because people are realizing that there's no point in involving you, because in the time frames that they're working on, you're not going to be able to deliver what they need you to do. It does feel quite weird because you're so used to being involved in stuff, and then suddenly you're not involved, and it begins to feel like you've already got one foot out the door, and that that you're not as valued as you once were. But actually, when you think about it, it's the complete opposite. The emotional side of this is quite significant, and it's strange how much of your life is tied up with the concept of being needed for something. And that's changing, and it takes a bit of adjusting to, really. Whilst the pressure of work is getting less and much less, you're beginning to feel lighter in terms of workload, but you're also beginning to feel less visible as well. But overall, the impacts on my well-being and my health have been really positive. I've pulled the trigger, I've made the commitment, I've told people I'm going. I'm making these gradual adjustments at work. And do you know what? In the 6 months so far since I announced, it has just nearly been 6 months. Do you know what? My mood has lifted massively, and it has. I'm actually finding I'm enjoying my work more than I have done in a long, long while. It's funny that, isn't it? My health has improved. I'm finding more time for the important things. I'm doing things like walking and exercise. I'm spending more time with my wife. And we're doing more exciting things together and enjoying the time together more than we have done for many years. It is strange how such a simple decision as, do you know what, I'm going to stop working, can have such a positive impact. And this period of pre-retirement has taught me a lot about myself as well. It is really, really sort of life-changing event. And I realized that it was something that I couldn't do quickly. I couldn't just do it in a moment. It was something that I needed to do gradually. I realized that, this change, this transition is uncomfortable at first before it gets easier. And it is thankfully starting to get easier. Work filled more emotional space than I realized, and learning to let go of the world of work is a skill that you've got to master. And you shouldn't be frightened by learning that skill. It takes time to learn any new skill. And that's why it's important, I think, to realize that, doing this gradually in your head is actually a really good thing for helping you adjust to your new way of living and the new adventures that await you. So if you're approaching retirement and you're feeling unsettled, conflicted, or oddly emotional, don't worry. There's nothing you're doing wrong. And what I've realised is that this is all just part of the transition. You're not failing to care. You're learning to let go. And one of the biggest things for me on this whole part of my journey was that I needed time to adjust, to make the transition. And I have given myself that 12-month window to do that. And I'm probably going to need all of it. So it's the middle of January now. It's cold, hence all the hat and everything else like that. I wonder what the next 6 months are going to bring. Hey, I wonder what changes I'm going to experience. I wonder how people are going to treat me over the next 6 months. And of course, I'll update you as these things happen as I head towards the 30th of June, which is my retirement date. I hope these videos have been helpful for you. They're primarily for me, But if you do find them helpful, if you do think you can relate to any of this stuff and you want to see what happens to me on my journey into retirement, do the YouTubey stuff, yeah? Hit the like, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications, and I'll update you next on the next video. One thing though is that if this retirement plan doesn't go well and I end up having to go back to work, well, at least I get the joys of going through this period all over again for a second time.